Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Read an Indie. And what are we looking at today? Well, in a bizarrely festive for June story, we are looking at The Thing in Christmas Town by Iseult Murphy. So, what is The Thing in Christmas Town? Well, it's a horror story. A festive horror story set in a festive-themed town, one you'll never leave. But in order to understand what is going on, we need to look at what it means to be dragged to Christmas Town. So, being dragged to Christmas Town is our main character Diane, a 55-year-old widow who is being taken there by her two children, Alex and Jennifer, as well as Jennifer's husband, Stephen. Now, I really like Diane as a main character. I had a lot of empathy right from the get-go for her, as she is dealing with the grief of the death of her husband 2 years ago at Christmas time from a car crash. And she is wrestling with these emotions, these deep and painful emotions. And yet, she is thrust into this situation of being dragged away to an overly kitsch, overly happy Christmas town. And this is partly why she is so empathetic for me, because she's already struggling with grief, and yet she feels betrayed by her own children because they are forcing her to go to this place. Quite frankly, a place that I would hate to go to anyway, because it's so over the top and happy, and I get the feeling that she would be the same, and yet being forced there while in such a deep state of grief, even 2 years on, is such a hard thing to do to her and very harsh. And as a result, I am completely on her side from the get-go. Now, of course, she loves her children, so she agrees to go even though she has been trapped into it on the morning of the excursion with no forewarning. However, as I said, she loves her children, and because of that, we do care about them, even though I personally absolutely detest what they have done to her and how they're trying to force her to be happy. Ah, Christmas Town. It's so happy and joyful here. You'll never leave. You'll never leave. You'll never leave. So, Christmas Town. It is a town, formerly a mining town, that is completely devoted to being Christmas every day of the year, complete with snow, even in June. And this is what Diane is confronted with upon her arrival. They have to get to the town by means of a train, as that's the only way you can get there. No cars or vehicles allowed, which could be a problem later on, maybe. And, of course, Diane, in the situation she is surrounded by all this forced joviality, which doesn't exactly make her situation any better. But while she is, of course, understandably frustrated with the situation, as all she wants to do is not be around people and to be allowed to grieve in peace, she is also noticing that Christmas Town has a few slight interesting quirks, such as displays that feel a little off, including paintings of gingerbread men, but perhaps one of those gingerbread men is impaled with a candy cane. But oddly, no one else seems to be noticing, just Diane. All these quirks and discrepancies, of course, add to her already fragile emotional state, which doesn't exactly help her enjoy the experience of being in Christmas Town. Quite frankly, she despises it, and I'm entirely with her in that feeling. But of course, things are getting more and more odd, and eventually, things get very bad. Now, I will be avoiding any spoilers, of course, but let's just say that I really sat up and took notice when Father Christmas, because that is what I have always called him, is instead referred to as Old Nick by someone, which made me go, because while he may be called Saint Nicholas in some ways, Old Nick is a little term for someone else. As for criticisms, and I always like to get criticisms out of the way as quickly as I can, and I only really have one, which is obviously things are happening to people in Christmas Town and they're not necessarily getting out. But the thing is, Christmas Town has been on operation for a while, and I kept thinking, wouldn't people have noticed that other people are not returning from Christmas Town? But that's just a small little quibble. Now we get on to a subject that I feel is a bit deeper and more important and quite striking within the story, and that is the theme of happiness, or, to be more accurate, I think, being forced to be happy. As I have touched on, Diane is essentially being forced to be happy by her own children. They are refusing to allow her to grieve in her own way, and not accepting her unhappiness, as it were, and trying to smother her with this Christmas Town to try and force her to be happy on the 2-year anniversary of her husband and their father's death. And this, for me, was very striking because I have feelings on this matter, as it is highly frustrating in the real world when you do feel upset, when you are in a stage of grief or depressive sadness, which I have been in myself, and others do not accept it, as it were. Your sadness makes them uncomfortable and they refuse to let you have the time to be sad. They try and force you to be happy. They try to deny the reality of your sadness. This is partly why I was so empathetic towards Diane, because she was being denied the natural feelings of sadness, of grieving, and then being forced into this rather overwhelming kitsch Christmas Town. And this made for a much more compelling read because I was so on Diane's side from the get-go. I was completely invested in her because I emotionally connected on that level. And so when things start going a little bit differently, shall we say, I've already got that investment, which draws me into the story, which is excellent for a horror story. And considering that in many ways the story is a fun little horror festive romp, it actually tackles grief in an incredibly mature way from Diane's perspective. She is still grieving and she's not being allowed to grieve properly, which very much happens in the real world. And grief is not a simple thing. It doesn't just pass after a couple of years. Eventually you start perhaps feeling better, but then it can come back for a certain reason or no reason. And I feel like it tackles it very well for what this story is. So, in conclusion, this is another horror story from the author that knows what it wants to be and does it. And it definitely gets a bit bloody at times, especially when the elves have anything to say. But it is also a very impressive treatment of grief and how others do not let others have that sadness, to experience the sadness that they naturally need to go through and instead try and force them to be happy, which is a very important part of the actual plot of the book. So if it sounds interesting, the thing in Christmas Town is definitely worth a read. It's not massively long, it's around 117 pages or something, so you can very easily read it in an afternoon or an evening, and while of course it is not the festive season right now when creating this video, it may well be suitable for your reading during the festive period later on in the year. And if you're in the mood for stories that tackle some emotional subjects, may I recommend my own fantasy series, The Mushroom Knight, featuring rich world building and deep emotional connections with characters, as well as some extra mushrooms. Well, that about wraps it up. So until next time, thanks for watching.